Alright, y'all, so welcome to the More Knowledge Show. Today is November 11th, 2019. Today is also the Veterans Day holiday. And once again, it's been a while since y'all seen me. It's been like 2 weeks, but I'm not even gonna worry about how long it's been. Let's just get right to it. So anyway, the first thing I want to talk about today is this big movement that's coming up in world history. So, if you've ever been to school before, you probably learned about all of the revolutions that we've had. Okay, of course you have your revolutions in government. You've had your social revolutions, like, I don't know, the Harlem Renaissance. You've had religious revolutions, like the First Great Awakening. You've had like revolution of ideas, like the Enlightenment. And then you've also had economic revolutions, which are changes in how things are produced, and that would be like the Industrial Revolution. But you've had multiple industrial revolutions. You've had the first Industrial Revolution, which was like the beginnings of mechanizing production, and then the second Industrial Revolution was like machines and stuff like that, like really starting to incorporate machines into the production process. The third Industrial Revolution was the beginnings of like automation, and it kind of took what in the second Industrial Revolution to the next level. But the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is this next big groundbreaking movement in our economy that we are currently in, and it's really going to start picking up over the next few years, as we see all these changes. But the fourth Industrial Revolution is really about artificial intelligence. It's bigger than any of these other revolutions in the past, because this fourth Industrial Revolution will almost create a whole nother race of existence on this planet. Like, you'll have male, female, and machine. And when you have something of this magnitude that's coming up, I think it's fair to say that the changes that are going to happen in this world from the fourth Industrial Revolution will be much more significant. Now, it's not to say that the other industrial revolutions were not significant, but the other industrial revolutions were kind of mixed in their effects. So yeah, you had like the environmental effects were not great. Some workers were overworked. They had not so great working conditions, increasing wealth inequality, increased urbanization, all that type of stuff that you learn in history class. But then you also had some positives, like more goods at cheaper prices, more efficient ways of producing things, just overall raising the standard of living for most people, because people can afford to buy things that maybe they couldn't afford to buy in the past. So it was kind of a mixed bag, some good, some bad, and that's kind of how it is with most movements. But I think that with the fourth Industrial Revolution, there is no definite direction. It's not going to be good or going to be bad. It's going to be one or the other. And you can't, at this point, we can't really predict whether this is going to be a great thing or a terrible thing. But you've heard, you can hear theories about how this fourth Industrial Revolution is going to be apocalyptic. And it very well could. Like, the rise of the machines could honestly do some terrible things that we can't even really imagine right now. But you've also heard things about how the fourth Industrial Revolution can create like a dream world, basically, where we may not even have to work anymore, because machines will do everything for us, and we could spend more time doing other things besides working all the time, which a lot of people say, working for a lot of people is kind of meaningless. People don't really find much meaning in their work. And then the fourth Industrial Revolution will maybe allow people to open themselves up and really live lives that they want to live, or switch more to work that actually means something to them. And so you kind of have these two sides, but it's going to be one or the other. You're not going to get both, okay? Because the two directions that we can head down kind of contradict each other. Either you have this great situation or a terrible situation. You can't have a great and terrible situation. And this fourth industrial revolution will lead to one of these eventual conclusions. So right now, I guess the reason why I'm saying all this is that I kind of want to talk about what is it looking like for right now. Is the results good? And for right now, the way it appears we're heading more down the road of the apocalyptic scenario. And the reason why I say this is because, you hear things about how, suicide rates are increasing, life expectancy is going down, people can't retire, there's increasing inequality, and then you start to see how this increase in machines, this innovation that's going on at an insane level, is really not being utilized by the rest of society in a way that creates value for most people. It is creating value, but it's not creating value for most people, and then that could lead to an uprising in the future. That could lead to many conflicts in the future. We are seeing many uprisings around the globe, but it could lead to this apocalyptic scenario where things get so bad as a result of this, as a result of this trend that we are heading down, that it does lead to this, war on the streets type situation where everyone's just fighting each other. And currently, that does appear to be the road that we're heading down. All right, because when you have technology increasing at the level that it is, the technology now that we have is insane. If you just look some stuff up, like the type of things that machines are capable of doing is, I don't think people even realize how advanced machines are getting, because they're seriously getting advanced, but humans are fading away. We're getting weaker. It's a fact. The vast majority of humans are getting weaker. A small number of people are really getting wealthy off of this fourth industrial revolution, at least so far. But a lot of people as a whole, are getting weaker. And that's shown by the fact that the life expectancy is falling. And that is not good. That's shown by the fact that, a lot of younger people can't cover their basic means of living. How wages have been pretty stagnant, and all of these things are going to lead to a weakening of the human population, and then the strengthening of the machine, greater reliance on machines, because humans will get weaker. Humans will get less healthier. Humans, they're getting addicted to drugs. We're having all these drug problems. A lot of people are dying from opioid addictions and all these things. And then you have machines which don't have those problems. So we are losing the battle with machines. And it seems like instead of living a world where humans and machines can work together to make everything better, it seems like we're living in a world where machines are going to take over and replace the human, which has all of the problems that currently exist among humans. And then the machines will end up being used to serve a very small group of elites, and then that system will lead to major violence, major pushback. But before that pushback happens, it's going to get extremely bad. And then when the pushback happens, when the uprisings start to begin, it will probably just get worse. Because, of course, war generally destroys things. It doesn't create anything. Okay? So, that's just what I wanted to say. 'Cause, if you listen to, what's his name? Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate, he always talks about how the fourth industrial revolution is upon us, but a lot of people are struggling. And, of course, his proposal is to give people $1,000 a month, which, I haven't done any deep research into that. I'm sure there's positive and negative effects, as there is with any policy, but it's just something to think about, because we are not heading in the right direction. So we should not be complacent on this issue. We should certainly try to find ways to bridge these gaps that exist, because if they get bigger to the point where you can't bridge them anymore, then it is inevitable that the apocalyptic scenario will occur, and that's kind of how it's seeming, at least at the moment. And so the next thing I want to talk about is the markets, as usual. I mean, I pretty much always talk about the markets on these more knowledge shows. It's quite an interesting topic. But I don't just talk about charts. Some people just talk about very specific company earnings, or they talk about charts and like the patterns in the stock market and where they think the stock market is going over the next 20 days. That's not what I'm doing. I'm taking what's going on in the stock market and trying to say what that means for the rest of the world. What is this implying? What could these market movements tell you? Because I believe that, as usual, market movements can help you predict the future. You can really get insights into market movements that people don't focus on, and information is definitely being hidden from us, but if you look closely enough for the signs, you can find the information you need. And right now, in the world of the stock market, we're seeing, at least American stock markets are hitting all-time highs. Okay, and they're currently hitting all-time highs. They're hitting all-time highs in the same time period where earnings are not exactly great. Forward earnings estimates are continuing to get worse, and hitting all-time highs and worsening forward earnings estimates are two things that simply do not go together. But I guess the reason why the forward earnings estimates, the weak forward earnings estimates, are kind of being ignored is, of course, the belief that this U.S.-China trade war will be resolved, and then the result from having no tariffs will be higher profitability, because tariffs are kind of a drag on profits. Not only that, uncertainty may prevent spending. All of these, overall it just slows economic activity. And if the trade war was to end, then economic activity would probably pick up, and you would probably also see that in higher earnings. But as usual, this is completely misleading. Currently, the markets, they still hold this general belief that things will be able to be saved once again, that everything is going to be completely fine. In 1 year, somehow things will get so much better, but it's completely miscalculating what's going to happen in the future. It's miscalculating, really, what historical shift is occurring around the globe. It's completely ignoring these things, and it's instead focusing on day-to-day headlines that may tell them something that they want to hear, but it's not looking at the big picture. And what the big picture is that we are having is this global shift in the order of our society. It's a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift, pretty much. It's a complete rearrangement of how countries are connected. It's a complete rearrangement of how business relationships across the world. And every time this happens, it happens with a crisis. Because when you see these massive changes all happen at one time, the conditions change. And when the conditions change, the businesses that have been thriving in those conditions aren't going to be thriving anymore, because they have to completely readjust. So that's why whenever you have these major shifts in how things are done, it causes a lot of economic problems and all of that. And usually these shifts happens due to people being unhappy. And when people are unhappy, you get populism and political instability, and that's kind of what's going on in our world right now. But people have not picked that up. People think that this trade war is just something that's going to be resolved, then everything will return back to normal. People have not realized that the entire global order is changing. All right. And the fact that this entire global order is changing should be something that is scaring markets. It should be something that markets are fearful of, because the conditions over the past, 10 years that have allowed for this long bull market are going to completely change. Completely, like, they're not going to exist anymore. I think, we're seeing countries move away from the dollar. There's limits realized now to the extent of how monetary policy can even stimulate things. All of these things are changing, and they're permanent. Well, they're not. Well, of course, no change is permanent. Eventually, there will be another major change in the future, but it's not going back to the way it was. It's not going back to the world that allowed for, the Federal Reserve to just pump in trillions of dollars of money and then spark a large market rally. All of that is coming to an end, and the markets do not realize that yet. And that is why I say that we're in a massive market bubble. This market bubble, it's a bubble because, of course, valuations are above where they should be. But the reason for this bubble is not like excessive speculation or exuberance, or people, are just making gambles. That's been the traditional reason for bubbles. I think the reason for this bubble is just ignorance of our situation, ignorance of the position that we are in today, and the inability to realize that things will not just return back to normal. Things are changing, and when they change, they're not going back. But when people do realize that, this bubble will burst. So right now we have a bubble that's built on ignorance and can only be maintained through brainwashing from our politicians, from the media, from all sources of information. They're brainwashing to convince people that, yes, there will be a trade deal. This trade war will end, Brexit will end peacefully. All of these things, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. But, as usual, markets cannot pick up on this. But when they do, just expect things to get bad. Now, one thing I will say is never underestimate their ability to kick the can down the road. Never underestimate their ability to continue to fool the public and continue to deceive people into thinking that things are great. I mean, they may be able to do this for a good amount of time, but eventually people are going to realize the significance of our situation, and it will not be good. And so the next topic I want to cover is what's going on, around the world besides just America. So, we've talked about Hong Kong and all the protests in Hong Kong, but also in Chile, they've had quite a bit of protest. But another place with a lot of protests is Lebanon, and the reason for the reason for their protest is because of a banking crisis. And pretty much the reason for the banking crisis is that, the economy's been slowing down, and then inflows of, dollars from outside sources have slowed down. And as a result, they have a dollar shortage. So people can't get the dollars they need in order to buy imports. People can't pull their money out of the banks. Banks are limiting the amount of they're limiting the money that people can take out. It's a typical banking crisis. But the result of this is that if people don't have the dollars they need because they can't get it to pay for imports, then you don't have any imports. And if you rely on imports, then you don't have the goods needed to satisfy the people in the country. And as a result, people are mad because people believe that even through all this, the banks are still profiting, and the banks are conspiring with the government, and all of that stuff is probably true to an extent. But of course, the protests and all these uprisings probably just make the situation even worse, because it just leads to more uncertainty and more instability, and that's just going to make, the economic situation worse, which at the same time will make the banking crisis worse probably. And this large banking crisis in a place like Lebanon, it just seems so far away from America. I think that's a common idea. Like, we don't even think that something like that could happen in America. But what I would say is, it can definitely happen in America. I would just say America has a lot more resources at its disposal, and also, having the dollar as reserve currency, they have a lot of these advantages that allow them to mask our problems, or make it appear that something like that couldn't happen here. Is the reason why people have so much confidence in America. People feel so safe and secure in America. But it definitely could happen in America. And if it does happen in America, if we do have a banking crisis, it's going to be at a much larger scale. The reason why is these problems have been masked over for so long that they've gotten bigger. Then if we didn't have these tools at our disposal to hide these problems, then we would be forced to solve them before they grew so big. But because our advantage is in a way a disadvantage, because now we have similar issues. We have issues in our banking system. It may not be exactly the same issues, but all banking panics kind of have similar problems. It's usually liquidity problems or excessive risk. It all comes down to confidence and trust. And we have those same problems. It's just we have the resources to hide those problems so people can't see them, but they do exist. And hiding problems do not solve problems. Solving problems requires acknowledging them, and acknowledging problems usually causes a crisis, which is something that we will not do. But because of that, these problems are going to get bigger, and when they do show themselves, they will show themselves in a much more extreme way than is seen in a country like Lebanon. So I'm just saying that to say, just look at a country like Lebanon as like a model, and then just imagine something much worse. And then that right there could just give you an idea for what could happen in America the next time we see like a banking crisis. And arguably, a banking crisis has already happened this year. I mean, the Federal Reserve is pumping billions of dollars into our banking system. There was already a banking crisis this year, but as usual, the Federal Reserve has the ability, they have the tools to hide the banking crisis by just printing dollars. Of course, a country like Lebanon, who relies on dollars, can't just print dollars because that's not their currency. They rely on inflows from other countries. But what happens if America also starts relying on inflows from other countries, because the dollar loses its status as its reserve currency, and then we end up in the same position? Well, and then we could have the same issue ourselves. So I just want to say that to say, like, do not think for 1 second that these problems in Lebanon can't happen here. They can happen here. They will happen here. And when they do happen here, it will most likely be worse for the reasons that I've already mentioned. So anyway, that's today's episode of the War Knowledge Show. I'll see y'all again next week. Hopefully nothing crazy happens within the week. Well, I mean, if something crazy does happen, we'll be here to cover it. We'll be here to make sure y'all know what's going on. But we're not here to reassure you that everything will be all right. We're here to tell you the truth, or at least my version of the truth. I'm not saying that everything I say is definitely the truth. It's just, the truth in my brain. But the truth in your brain is, of course, different from the truth in my brain. So let's just make that clear. Not everything I'm saying is definitely correct or something that you should take as advice. It's just something that you should hear and then either use it to build your own arguments, or use it to disagree. So anyway, have a great day. I'm out. Goodbye.